Along the banks of the Mississippi River, where wild geese still rise from the marshes at dawn and the prairies stretch wide into the horizon, lived a warrior whose name would echo through American history. His name was Black Hawk. A Sauk war leader, a farmer, a father, and a man who refused to abandon the land of his people without a fight. This is the story of the Black Hawk War of 1832, a brief but violent conflict that marked the end of native resistance in the Old Northwest, and revealed the fierce courage of a people facing impossible odds. The land of the Sauk. Black Hawk was born in 1767 in the village of Saukanook, near the confluence of the Rock and Mississippi rivers in what is now Illinois. It was the heart of Sauk territory, a place of great beauty and abundance. Corn grew tall. Deer roamed freely. The river gave life. From a young age, Black Hawk was drawn to the traditions of his ancestors. He rose not by birth, but by bravery. At just 15, he joined a raid and earned his place among the warriors of his tribe. He would fight in many battles throughout his life, first against rival tribes, and later, against the growing power of the United States. A treaty signed in darkness. In 1804, while Black Hawk was away, several tribal leaders signed a treaty with U.S. officials in St. Louis. That document would haunt the Sauk for decades. It ceded millions of acres of Sauk and Fox land in Illinois in exchange for a small annuity and promises the U.S. would not keep. Crucially, Black Hawk and many tribal elders never agreed to the deal. To the United States, the land now belonged to settlers. To Black Hawk, it was theft. Return to Saukanook. By the early 1830s, pressure on native lands had intensified. Illinois settlers, backed by the federal government, began pouring into the area. Saukanook was soon occupied by white families. Black Hawk and his people were pushed across the Mississippi into Iowa. But in the spring of 1832, Black Hawk, now in his mid-60s, gathered a band of around 1,000 people, warriors, women, children, and elders. They crossed back into Illinois to plant corn in their ancestral home. To Black Hawk, it was a peaceful return. To the government, it was an invasion. Thus began the Black Hawk War. The final stand. What followed was not a war in the traditional sense. It was a running fight, a desperate, months-long retreat through the forests and rivers of Illinois and Wisconsin. Black Hawk's followers were poorly armed, hungry, and exhausted. Yet time and again, they evaded the militias and federal troops sent to destroy them. Black Hawk's tactics, guerrilla-style ambushes, night movements, use of the terrain, kept them alive longer than anyone expected. But as the weeks dragged on, starvation and sickness took their toll. Meanwhile, hysteria gripped the frontier. Newspapers inflamed the public, spreading rumors of massacres and savage uprisings. Abraham Lincoln, still a young volunteer in the Illinois militia, was among the men mustered to hunt Black Hawk, though he saw no combat. Bad Axe River. In August 1832, the end came at the Battle of Bad Axe, on the banks of the Mississippi River. Black Hawk's group, now reduced to just a few hundred, tried to cross the river back into Iowa. But the U.S. Army and a steamboat armed with cannon blocked their escape. What followed was a slaughter. Men, women, and children were cut down as they tried to flee or swim. It wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Nearly 300 were killed. Black Hawk escaped briefly but was soon captured. A warrior's capture. Black Hawk was taken east in chains. He passed through cities like St. Louis, Cincinnati, and Washington, where curious crowds came to stare at the savage chieftain. But to many, he was no longer a threat, he was a symbol. A living relic of a disappearing world. In 1833, Black Hawk dictated his memoirs to a U.S. interpreter, making him one of the first Native American leaders to publish an autobiography. His words were proud, poetic, and defiant. He wrote, "Rock River was a beautiful country. I loved my towns, my cornfields, and the home of my people. I fought for it. Death in silence." After his release, Black Hawk lived quietly near the Des Moines River in what is now Iowa. He died in 1838 at the age of 71. His body was later exhumed and put on display by the Iowa Historical Society, a final indignity that caused outrage among his people. His remains were eventually lost. But his story lives on. The Echo on the River. Black Hawk was not a war criminal. He was not a tyrant. He was a man defending his homeland, the fields where his ancestors hunted, the rivers that fed his children, the bones of his people buried in the soil. He fought not for conquest, but for memory. For dignity. For the right to walk in the place where his life began. Today, the name Black Hawk appears on highways, schools, and sports teams. But how many remember the man? A warrior. A leader. A ghost on the river. Black Hawk. The one who would not leave.